would somebody want to spend some time explaining the reasons for HS2? Well, I suppose the reason is that I'm rather interested in the project. Obviously, there are some significant economic questions, but actually, when looking at the pros and the cons, I think there are some good reasons for having HS2. Actually, I think that the case for HS2 has been rather badly made. Some of the very clear reasons for having HS2 have not been put in the public arena. People think we're having HS2 for reasons which are not the real reasons. And the purpose of this video is to explain the real reasons why HS2 is actually quite a good idea. I'm going to start off by asking a simple question, but it may sound like a strange question. The question is this: why is the train from Manchester to London so cheap? What? That's an extraordinary question. Who would say that? Do you know how much it costs to get on the train from Manchester to London? Well, this is what it costs. If we look in the National Rail Journey Planner, we see we can get a train, tomorrow being a Thursday morning, from Manchester to London for a mere £175. Cheap? I said, why is the rail fare from Manchester to London so cheap? £175, that doesn't sound particularly cheap to me. Well, I suppose it's not bad in the scale of things. It is, after all, about 200 miles from Manchester to London, so that £175 works out at about 90 pence a mile. But the question I asked is this: why is the fare so cheap? To understand that, let's look at fare prices a little bit later in the day. If we're prepared to leave our departure time until 12 o'clock, then we can get to London for £88. But if we leave the departure time until 12:35, then we get the cheapest fare, which is £41. Why does it cost so much more to travel in the morning to London from Manchester than it does in the afternoon? Well, the answer to that question is pretty straightforward. It's to do with supply and demand. Who wants to go to London in the morning? The answer is a whole host of people with very important reasons for being in London wants to travel to London in the morning and get to London in time to do a whole day's work. That's why early trains from Manchester are expensive. But come 12 o'clock, most of the people who really have to travel to London have done their travelling. Then we find we've got a whole fleet of trains which are not doing very much. Of course, there is some demand in the afternoon for travelling from Manchester to London, but there is a lot of extra capacity. And train companies, for very sensible reasons, want to maximise that revenue. What they do is that they drop the price in the afternoon, so that more people travel in the afternoon. That has two benefits. The first thing is this: anybody who can possibly travel from Manchester to London in the afternoon instead of in the morning shifts their travel from the morning to the afternoon. So that relieves overcrowding in the morning. But also, people who fancy a day in London are attracted to the opportunity to travel to London at £41 in the afternoon. That means perhaps that they can go to a show in the evening and enjoy London without having to pay that £175. There are some people whose spending priorities are such that they wouldn't be prepared to spend £41 on a ticket to London. Let's see if we can attract some of them to take a train to London. Maybe we can tempt them to take the trip if we made it a little bit cheaper. But to make sure everybody didn't take that route, we'll put some extra conditions there. That's advance booking for you. If we look at the price of tickets 6 weeks away, we see that if we book in advance, we can get to London from Manchester for as little as £24. That way, the train company fills up all those spare places that otherwise they couldn't sell, and it means extra revenue for the train company. Now, I don't live in Manchester, and I don't often want to go to London, so I almost never travel on peak trains. And why would I not travel on peak trains? One of the reasons, of course, is price. But the other reason is something that I've already mentioned briefly, which is overcrowding. In fact, if you want a peak time train from Manchester to London, then you'll find that more tickets are sold than there are seats available. The train is crowded, and the reason that we have overcrowding is we don't have sufficient trains. That, in essence, is the reason why we need HS2. But we don't need extra trains in order to stop the overcrowding. What we could do, if we wanted to do, to reduce the overcrowding on trains is to increase the price of a ticket. If, instead of £175, we charged £350 for a train ticket from Manchester to London, that would reduce the overcrowding. Many of the people who would pay £175 would not be prepared to pay £350. So, here we are. We can stop overcrowding on the trains instantly by raising the prices so that the prices reflect the real market value of going on that train. All we have to do is raise the ticket prices from Manchester to London until the time that overcrowding disappears. Now, surprisingly, the amount that you'd have to raise the train prices is really quite a lot. And actually, some in the industry say that you could indeed double the fare from Manchester to London to £350, and you would still have full trains in the peak times. That's the real price that enough consumers would be prepared to pay in order to get a train from Manchester to London in the morning. In fact, if you want to maximise revenue, you could probably get the train ticket prices up to £450 in the morning, because there would still be enough people wanting to pay £450 from Manchester to London because their journey is financially so important for them. Well, I started off this video by asking the question, why are train tickets from Manchester to London so cheap? We've seen that there's a good economic case for charging perhaps £300 or £400 for a ticket from Manchester to London. Why on earth do the train companies only charge £175? Now, if train companies were really to charge the economic price of a ticket, there would be outrage. What it would mean is that only the wealthy people could use the trains in the morning. Remember, there'd still be the same situation in the afternoons. Cheap travel would be available for those of us who are prepared to pay a lower rate in the afternoon, but if you wanted to travel in the morning, you'd have to be rich. But there's a balancing act. If the train operators are allowed to charge as much as they want, then they can obviously make more profit. They will therefore bid a higher price or a smaller subsidy when they're bidding for franchises, and therefore the government will be better off, and there is more money available for both improving rail transport and also for general government expenditure. On the other hand, there are wider implications if fares rise very high. It's clearly not a good idea if the only people who can travel on trains are those people who have huge amounts of disposable cash. So, train operators are restricted in the amount that they can raise fares over time. And the reason that the normal ticket price from Manchester to London is only £175 is because that's all that the franchise owner is allowed to charge. That answers our first question. Why is the fare from Manchester to London only £175? The answer is because even though customers would actually pay more, the train company is regulated to prevent them charging any more. Now, the last part of this video is asking the question that we are really interested in about our railway system. How can we make the ticket prices cheaper? Because the government, society as a whole, we as individuals want it to be easy and relatively cheap to move around in the UK. There are considerable economic advantages to make that possible. So we come to the obvious question to ask. How can we make peak time travel from Manchester to London be of a reasonable price, and yet stop the trains being overcrowded? And the answer is simple. We have more trains, and more trains, and more trains. Now, the first effect of having more trains is that more people will travel at the same price. But if we have enough more trains, if we have enough extra capacity from Manchester to London, then in order to fill that capacity, the train operating companies will drop the prices. Ticket prices will go down. That's one of the reasons why ticket prices in many of the European countries are lower than they are in the UK. They have sufficient trains running so that they're not full all the time. It's financially better for them to have a large number of passengers paying a relatively low fare rather than relatively few passengers paying an extremely high fare. So what do we need? We need more trains between Manchester and London. Because if there are more trains, there are more seats, it will be easier and cheaper to travel between Manchester and London. Now at my next video, I look at some of the things that have already been done with the rail network, how investing in the existing rail network has already allowed there to be more trains from Manchester to London, and how HS2 is a natural extension to those plans.